Now, people always seem to assume that men just know if they're in love. Because after all, whenever you see a romantic comedy, it always seems like the marriage proposal is from a guy. So then we would assume that he would always know that she's the one. And then when he proposes, then she gets to say yes or no. So, of course, then our assumption is that the guy has to know before the girl, right? Or actually, if you think about it, that doesn't always seem to be the case. Now, contrary to popular media, where you typically see women considering, oh, it's like, do I like him? Do I not like him? But as an astrologer with something like almost 20 years of experience doing consultations, my experience is that it seems to be the other way around. That the women actually are usually quite grounded. Like they would know if this guy is like husband material or not. But what I found conversely is that the men are often a lot more concerned with love, less concerned with the practical factors, but rather how does he feel about her and how does she feel about him, and is it love? Is she the one? And I actually have more men asking me about this than women do. Now, also, you find that men have been told for a long time that when they look for a woman, what they're looking for is attractiveness and how she makes him feel. So he's looking for things like, oh, she's pretty, she's hot, she's fun, we have a great time with each other, we get along with each other. That seems to be what he's typically looking for. But you could easily use all those characteristics and talk about some girl that you randomly meet in a bar, and that's not necessarily a woman that you want to settle down with. So what exactly is this X factor that helps a man to understand the difference between whether this girl is somebody that you meet for a good time, the girlfriend, or somebody that you settle down with to sort of go through life's trials and tribulations, i.e. the wife? So the first planet we're going to begin with is the planet Venus, and that is the planet of love. But I like to nickname that this planet is also known as the girlfriend planet. And the reason is simple. It's because Venus represents things like attractiveness, femininity, love, and romance. It's that feeling of butterflies in your stomach. So in a man's case, Venus will describe what makes him feel really excited to go and meet this woman. It's him running down the streets because he's in love with somebody. So I'm going to use the example of a famous playboy. And he's a bit on the old side right now, but at least he's got a really long history of lots of girlfriends and people that he's been linked with. And I'm talking about none other than George Clooney. Good looking guy, he's had lots of girlfriends. Now, if you look at his astrology chart, you will see that George Clooney has got Venus in Aries in the first house. Now, it is also unexpected. So lots of technical terms, but essentially what this means is that George Clooney can be very attracted to a particular kind of look, of a certain type of mannerisms. And because Venus is in Aries, he likes feisty, he likes women with a bit of fire and energy with it, a very youthful sort of energy. But also the fact that Venus is unexpected can also mean he can find it a little bit hard to sort of integrate a woman into his life. So she might be really good as arm candy or somebody to hang out with on weekends, but not necessarily as like a fixture in his life. So some of the comments that we've seen from his girlfriends, which include people like Stacy Kibler and also more famously Renee Zellweger and plenty of other famous people, is that they said that he seems to be rather detached. Like they seem to have a good time when they're together, but never this impression that he's really going to sort of integrate them into his life. And for a long time, the world expected that George Clooney was never going to settle down, that he was going to be an eternal bachelor. Until, of course, he met Amal Alamuddin. And now this brings us to another planet called the Moon. And the Moon represents something very different in a man's chart. There is nothing romantic about the Moon. It's not exciting. In fact, it conjures up images of like a domestic life. It's about kids, about buying a house. It's about going home super exhausted at the end of the night and all you want to do is just watch Netflix or like eat potato chips or something like that. And so the Moon in a man's chart actually describes things like emotional support. It describes the kind of domestic life that he's looking at. But notice, none of it is really about like sort of romance in the way that we think of it. In fact, a lot of it is very mature, it's very down to earth. Now, if we look at George Clooney's chart, he's got moon in the 11th house in Capricorn. Now, the moon is also conjunct Saturn, and that's a very serious planet. So again, those are very technical terms, but here's what this means. When a man has got moon in Capricorn, then this is a very different energy from the Aries energy. So the woman that he marries and who he looks at her and he thinks, okay, this is wife material, has to be a really serious woman, somebody who cares about her career. And it's not really a career being like a comedian or like a dancer on stage, nothing frivolous like that. If it's Capricorn, she'll want to do very important things. Now, on top of that, the moon is also conjunct Saturn. And what this means is that for him, being in a long-term relationship also means buckling down, becoming a lot more mature, which is a very strange thing to say about a man who is quite advanced in age by the time he met Amal. Now, most people are really surprised to find out that George Clooney has actually been married before. When he was a lot younger, he was married to an actress called Talia Balsam. And this woman actually did conform to the description of moon in Capricorn as well. So they were both actors who were trying to make it in Hollywood, and they'd been together. But by George Clooney's own admission, he said that he wasn't quite mature enough to accept that relationship, and he didn't do what he was responsible for doing in the marriage, and which is why it failed. So of course they went on in their own separate ways. But what really happened this time around was that if you look into his chart, he's got moon in the 11th house. And what this means is that for a woman to sort of inspire ideas of settling down, she needs to bring him into this sense of a community, that they are caring for a group of people. Now, while Talia Balsam might have been suited to the moon in Capricorn, like a really settled down woman, but she wasn't quite doing something that was like for community. She was an actress, but not really doing anything very 11th house. But you see, for Amal, this is a human rights lawyer. In fact, as of the time of me recording this, she's just been involved in some negotiations with Israel and with the hostages in Gaza. So this is a woman who really cares about humanity and of people far beyond just herself. And so, and what this means is that for him to recognize in her and to fall in love with her very, very quickly, and to feel like he wanted to marry her very, very quickly was a huge shock to most people in the world, because this is not what you expected from George Clooney. And Amal is not quite the kind of woman that he typically dates. So it doesn't mean that a man, when he marries, is going to put aside Venus. Like it's not about romance. It's not about like, it's all about just buying a house and being like old and growing fat. But that's not necessarily the case, because Amal is a very beautiful woman, and she also has that fiery look and the bright red lipstick, and you don't get the impression that you're going to outrun her. You know, she actually looks really agile and energetic kind of person. So what he described is that he hit the jackpot with Amal Clooney, and which means that she met both the moon wife material and the attractive girlfriend material. Now let's look at some examples of somebody who kind of got one part correct, the girlfriend part, but not the wife part. So my example here is John Mayer, and he's got some really famous girlfriends in his wake. He's dated people like Katy Perry, Jennifer Aniston, Jennifer Love Hewitt, Jessica Simpson, and the list goes on, and it includes also Taylor Swift. John Mayer, he has got Venus in Virgo, which tells you the kind of woman that he's attracted to is not really the fiery kind, but Virgo is very clean-cut. These are very hardworking women who sort of want to improve themselves, do good, and so far, his entire list of girlfriends conforms to that. Now, quite unfortunately also for John Mayer, he has Venus in the 12th house. And what this means is that his approach to relationships have been somewhat either secretive. So it could be that some of these girlfriends are not exactly like openly discussed. Some of it has been quite secret. But also the 12th house suggests that there's a measure of escapism here. Now you might be thinking, well, what do you mean by escapism? I guess it has something to do with the fact that everybody's just so famous. So the idea that you could sort of have this sort of secret behind the scenes sort of romance can be very exciting for John Mayer. And the other clue we have that a lot of his relationships are based on fantasy and this idea of wistful yearning, or like, oh, that's the one who got away, and maybe in another universe we might be really good together. It's all very rom-com and romantic, but not really grounded in reality. And how we know that is because he's gone and written songs about his partners, and the themes here include things like your body is a wonderland. So the idea of a wonderland to begin with, and also songs written like Paper Doll, or even Still Feel Like Your Man. So there's this sense of, okay, there's the one who got away, but like we didn't really have like a real relationship going. So that's one of the issues here when what John Mayer is getting again and again is the girlfriend experience, but not necessarily the wife experience, which is described very differently in his chart as Moon in Sagittarius in the third house. If you ever get a sense that John Mayer is starting to date a woman who cares a lot about a message, a very optimistic message, and you should also see that this is a woman who inspires him to use his fame and his status as a very famous person to put out into the world a very inspiring, a very optimistic message that is about getting people to sort of appreciate themselves, and it's a much lighter message than a lot of the kind of sad songs that he's been writing about his girlfriends. And then we will know that John Mayer has picked a very different kind of woman, and that he's a lot more likely to commit to a wife than to have an ever-revolving door of girlfriends. Now, another famous example, of course, is a kind of an old playboy bachelor, and that is Leonardo DiCaprio. So Leo has got a whole list of girlfriends as well. The most famous is Gisele Bündchen, but he's also been with Bar Raffaelli, and right now his most recent girlfriend is somebody called Vittorio Ceretti. So now Leonardo DiCaprio has got Venus in Scorpio, and Venus in Scorpio suggests that he likes this kind of like a sexy sort of vibe. So different from George Clooney. George Clooney likes like fiery, and John Mayer likes like a clean cut type. But Leonardo DiCaprio likes sexy, and he's got a whole list of models in his list of girlfriends. Now the Venus is also in the second house, so which means that a lot of times when he gets into a relationship, so unlike John Mayer, it's not about a fantasy per se, but rather there's this sense of value, and this can also mean things like sometimes in a not very nice way. It could mean people tapping on each other's fame as a way to sort of forward their career. It could also be that if you're with somebody who's very good looking, for example, that it sort of ups your value. Now, in case you're thinking, oh my God, May, this all sounds very transactional, that's because it kind of is. Because Venus is a very transactional planet. And what this means is that, well, I mean, if you're giving me a benefit, then I'll give you a benefit too. But however, it's not necessarily the kind of relationship that you feel that, oh, we are going to be together no matter what. And even if you grow old, even if you're fat, and even if things aren't going great for you, that we're going to be together no matter what. As far as I can tell, with Leonardo DiCaprio and his list of girlfriends, it hasn't really gone beyond that transactional value, because his wife planet is actually the moon in Libra in the first house. One day, if you ever come across Leonardo DiCaprio dating somebody who is a lot more classy than sexy. So the classy could mean something along the lines of more Meryl Streep than, Bridget Bardot, if you know what I'm trying to say. Now, Leonardo DiCaprio also has the moon square Saturn in the 10th house. And this actually suggests something very, very different. And like George Clooney, sometimes we can tell that the guy has hit the jackpot when he starts dating the type of woman that he doesn't typically date. So what I'm about to describe is something that we don't associate with Leonardo DiCaprio and his girlfriends. And for once, it could be somebody who is not famous at all. So someone who isn't a model, isn't an actress, just a pretty regular person with a more conventional type of career. Or it could even be somebody who doesn't want a career at all, who would much prefer to be more domesticated, not necessarily a mother, but somebody who just would rather have a quieter life, and not necessarily as a sexy celebrity, which, if you think about it, is pretty much all his girlfriends have been sexy celebrities or models. And that should Leonardo DiCaprio settle down, is going to be a very, very different type of woman than the people he has dated all his life. And now that we've covered a few of these examples, what then is the conclusion? So you see, if a young man is thinking, well, I'm having a bit of difficulties finding the right woman, or maybe I've been dating people, but I've never really found the right person to settle down with, it's very easy to use astrology as a way to justify that, oh, I just don't think she's the one, I don't think she's the right person. And that would be the equivalent of DiCaprio looking at his sexy girlfriend and going like, yeah, I don't know, she's not the one, maybe we'll break up and we'll move on. But actually, the deeper conclusion here is that when a man is ready to settle down, the truth is his criteria changes greatly. So it's not about whether he feels loved, whether or not he feels romantic, or whether he's in love with her, that actually he's looking for a very, very different type of person, just like in the case of George Clooney, when he settled down with a human rights lawyer and not somebody with a fiery, exciting sort of personality. What changed was not the woman that he dated, but what changed was the man that he became. And this was somebody who was ready to settle down. So in conclusion, if you are a man and you have questions about your own dating history, perhaps there are people in the past that you wanted to assess if, like, perhaps you were on a trajectory of girlfriend, or how then does a person make a transition into changing your criteria to actually look for a person that you can actually settle down with, then you might want to consider an astrological consultation with someone who can really understand what personal transformation you have to get into before you can start to settle down. Now, I also know that there are people among you, women perhaps, who are also interested in doing similar analysis for yourself. Now, today I've talked about men, but actually a lot of the same principles apply to women as well. So you might also want to look at doing an astrological consultation. You'll find links that will lead you to how you can book a consultation with me. Now, I know that some of you here are not necessarily facing issues on your own, but you could be in a position to advise people in your life. So they could be your friends, you could be a practitioner, and sometimes it's very hard to sort of give advice not based on your own biases of, oh, I think you should be with somebody like that, but rather as practitioners, you want to be able to give advice based on what that other person really wants in a relationship. And there are very few tools that give you the objectivity that an astrology chart can provide. So you can find out from us also how you can be part of our classes, and I'll be very happy to teach you how to read charts to understand your clients a lot better.